Hey guys, how's it going? I'm the Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi, gross music YouTuber. And I don't mean that literally, as I showered not that long ago this evening. But today we're talking about something kind of gross. We're continuing the death metal chart as we slowly slide down the ooze into a new section, one I'm excited for. We're into the grindcore influenced section, the grind adjacent genres. So, like the little black and death metal section where we covered a broad array of stuff, we're doing it again today, only this time with the hardcore punk influence. Unfortunately, we're not going to be mentioning Deathstrike today, but that's my little addition to this whole thing here. But basically, it's a death grind, gore grind, whatever grind section we're looking at here. And we're actually going to start with an album that was requested several parts ago, Repulsion's Horrified. This is one of them that started it all. This one might have even invented grindcore a bit. You know, it's got some very old school style production things. It's got really raw production. You've got vocals that sound a lot like extreme thrash metal of the time. Really good thrashy riffs, but a really excellent like sort of crossover thrash leaning riff style that sounds really cool. Not to mention this thing has so many tracks on it. It's how it even reaches a half hour in length. It's got these rolling intense riffs that are really sick. And as much as the production certainly is on the rawer side, it's fully mixed. It fills your ears in a way that works perfectly. Maybe it took a remaster to do that, but the fact that the stems existed at all is pretty nice, and that just goes to show that the recording of this was solid. I also really dig the swank beats all over this thing, makes it extra thrashy. And, you know, there's also a serious dosage of bottom end here. The bass on the EQ settings is nice, as well as the bass guitar is rather prominent as well. So you get a serious dosage of heaviness. You get a whole bunch of sort of Kerry King-esque guitar solos that last no more than a few seconds. And it's got a very simple, effective structure to almost every song. Almost all of them have just two parts to them. The main riff and the sort of response. And that's all you need. Yeah, this is very simple, lo-fi, high-test music. It's great to work out to, and it's great. You know, get your reps in, take your zinc pills, and then eat your Greek yogurt because this is something for that. But it's also pretty gross at the same time. That being said, it's not as gross as things are going to get. For example, Carcass's reek of putrefaction. When it comes to gore grind, there's not a lot of great stuff. Most of it is even bad, but that is not true about Reek of Putrefaction. It is arguably the very first ever real gore grind album. And gore grind has some sloppy riff styles, some really, really raw sounding, muddy production, like really distorted vocals as well. But Carcass does have their death metal roots on full display here. You know, good blast beats, technicality, heavy, low, chuggy, tremolo riffs sound all really great. And it has this sort of war metal style cacophony, a lot like early Blasphemy could potentially be. But at the same time, this thing is super, super heavy and groovy at the same time, something that a lot of death metal does really well. So if you like bands like Cannibal Corpse, Reek of Putrefaction is your gateway into gore grind. In all honesty, this album does sound bad, but it's hard-hitting and it's kind of lit. It is just death metal enough to be heavy and aggressive, which is all it needs. There are blast beats all over this album. It is definitely a very prominent feature here, and it just adds to the layers of filth. And also, there's a lot of weird guitar effects here. I don't know what pedal setup they use, but it sounds crazy. It's solid riffs, very enjoyable, and extremely punky. As far as gore grind goes, doesn't get that much better than Reek of Putrefaction. This is a great album, and also the concept of this being like an anti-meat eating album is awesome. If you guys didn't know this, Carcass was like a band of vegans who like wanted to portray gore and be like, this is what you guys are doing. And as much as vegans can be annoying sometimes, you know, there's those weird TikTokers that make those horrible songs. Carcass is not one of them. They make good music. Very good music. Speaking of, up next is Dead Infection's Chapter of Accidents. I've covered this on the Caveman Riff chart about a year ago, and I don't have a ton of interest in revisiting it that deeply. It's pretty typical gore grind, very fast, seemingly triggered blast beats on this whole thing, complete with very, very lo-fi production. As far as gore grind goes, I think it's good, but really not all that special. It kind of just seeps into the rest of the genre. And that leads us out of the gore grind section into death grind, where now we have Terrorizer with World Downfall. And we have a feature of death grind that I love absolutely, a surging blitz speed. Incredible speed. It sounds totally based. That's the thing about Death Grind that never gets old. It's the sheer amount of intensity. It is probably the most intense subgenre of metal I can think of. And it doesn't compromise on any of this stuff. And the grooviness is there, and the really chunky death metal lower riffages here. It's on the brutal side. It's awesome. So it's definitely on the unsophisticated side of things, but it is just as creative as it has to be. Not that creative at all. It's just stupidly heavy. Dynamics are here. Build-ups happen all the time. The blast beats are lightning fast. The riffs can get decently technical despite how simple the structures are. If for anything, just for the speed. Every single riff on this album hits like a truck. This thing is great. It does exactly what it says on the tin for Death Grind. It is the poster child for Death Grind, at least when you're reaching album lengths of over a half hour long. Then we are actually treated to a compilation of sorts. Hemdale's Rad Jackson. 37 songs, barely an hour long in length. And this one's kind of weird because it bridges the gap between death grind, gore grind, traditional grindcore, and some death metal. And its position on this chart is here almost intrinsically because there isn't any Mortician. If you like Mortician, you're gonna like Hemdale. I just wish Hemdale had a full-length album instead of a compilation. That being said, this album is really cool. If you like Mortician's usages of just the dumbest, heaviest death metal you could think of with a split of horror movie samples, here instead you have I don't know how to adult film samples. I'll go with that one, as well as the filthiest, heaviest grindcore you can think of. It's definitely a bit more on the grindcore side. It's definitely punkier, a little more political, a little bit more angry, instead of just heavy for the heaviness sake. The slower points here just point to the absolute heaviness of their pedal setup because they sound like sludge metal. And for a compilation of basically 3 splits in a demo, this thing doesn't seem to get old that quickly. The guitar tone sounds like you're wearing Doc Martens on gravel, or Timberlands if you're cool. The 2 vocalists setup here is absolutely amazing. You have these really unhinged deep growls with these more high-pitched, like wretched, almost like bile sounding high screams. This entire compilation consists almost entirely of 1.5 minute long death grind blasts of fury with these crazy breakdowns in between each one. It almost works like one whole song that lasts almost an hour long. And as sexual and as humorous as this thing really is, it's really the doominess that shows up on almost half the tracks here that really carries this thing through to the finish line. It gives it an extra bonus of character, like a level of being distraught in your listening experience here, which makes it really interesting. But overall, this thing is great because it's just so heavy and thick. It's not exactly the smartest album on the block, but we're talking about grindcore here. You need to lower your expectations. And up next, we got a short one for you, Ass Sucks Misery Index. And oh man, I wish I didn't have to tell you how good this thing is, because you should just listen to it, because it's like 20 minutes. Dense riffs, layers of feedback, breakneck speed, makes 15 minutes feel complete. Yeah, simply because of how aggressive and how much of an assault this album is, this is one of the greatest death grind albums of all time, even grind albums. Every single track here is amazing for a slightly different reason. All the riffs bring something else to the table, and I just love it. And up next is the album Matanda Guerreros by Brujeria, pretty famous Mexican death grind band. This one ekes out over a half hour of just about 32 minutes in length, so very approachable, a little on the longer side for something in this genre, but due to the thrashing, heavy, and even low fidelity nature of this whole thing, you want a more complete listening experience. You get a really aggressive grind style with a serious amount of just chunk factor in here, a lot of riffs that just pop off at the weirdest points, as well as some really heavy yelled vocals. It's also really varied with a lot of interesting riffs here. Also double kicks all over this thing that add up some really interesting syncopation. You get this dirty, raw production and a little bit of silliness, but overall this thing just feels like beast mode. And if that didn't sell you, then it just dots in all these really noisy, crusty harmonics all over the album just to make it filthier. So it's great simply due to the filth factor. The fact that this isn't gore grind, it just goes to show how good of songwriters these guys are. So I recommend this one for sure. And there's only one album left of the day, and it's by a real fan favorite, Napalm Death. So what album can it be if it's Napalm Death? You know, you have a storied career of 30 years or so and all the albums that ever existed. For some reason, this chart picks Order of the Leech, their 2002 album. I'm hard pressed to believe that's the best death grind album of 2002. But I have to say, in terms of sheer dissonance, this album is pretty singular. And this thing has instant impact. It does not take its time. The vocals are really yelly, though. Honestly, reminds me of Corey Taylor from Slipknot, of all things. I love how little care is put into the transitions here. They are just whiplash inducing. And there's also a respectable amount of breakdowns on here. Nothing too egregious, but when they hit, they certainly hit. There are a lot of more moshy moments, a lot of fast riffs, a lot of really excellent blast beats. I'd say the only real flaw of this thing is that it's just a bit overproduced, but then you get the trade-off of stuff like really dense texture on the drums that makes the blast beats sound all that much better. So it's kind of a take it or leave it type of thing. That being said, I think this album's great. I think Napalm Death has a pretty storied historical career with a lot of really excellent material. And it didn't start or end with this album for sure. I'm sure they did good stuff after it, and they definitely did better stuff before. But this thing is certainly worth your time. It's definitely on the riffier side for Napalm Death. It's very enjoyable. And nothing quite like a short video to cover some death grind. This is as classic as death grind gets. You know, of course, there are bands like Brutal Truth or Magruder Grind. Bands like that could be mentioned. If someone goes into my comments and says, "Where's Nails?" I'll be a little miffed, even though I do like Nails. They just don't belong here necessarily. Sure, there's more death grind out there. Again, the war grind trend is going on right now. But I don't feel like mentioning any of that stuff because it would just be pointless and distracting from the purpose of these videos where it's reviewing some bozo on Mew's chart. Or at least he used to be on Mew, or she, or whatever that person is now. Might not even be a person, could be an alien or a dog who knows how to use a computer. But yeah, that's about it. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'd appreciate a like and subscribe. Any comments, questions, or concerns, go ahead and put down there. I've mentioned it plenty of times, and I'll mention it one more time, I guess, if I don't mention it more after this. Jen made the thumbnail, smiling friends doing Scream Bloody Gore. Isn't that cute? Jen is in the description below, as well as more of myself, my Instagram, my Twitter, and my Discord page, where you should definitely go join and talk to me and my friends about Blade. And yeah, next time we're going to talk about some more Carcass. But that's about it. Hope you guys have a good day. Bye.